In the earliest era, before agriculture, before cities, before dynasties, the world was already being treated as an environment under observation. Interaction did not begin as a single global event, nor did it begin in a way that would leave behind a single clean artifact for later societies to point to. Instead, it unfolded as a controlled interaction campaign, phased, regional, and constrained. The earliest boundary is not the first empire, but the first instance of large-scale coordination without apparent survival necessity. Pre-agricultural sites such as Göbekli Tepe function as an initial signal threshold. Monumental construction appears before farming, before states, before surplus, and before coercive hierarchy. This reverses the expected order of human development. Labor is mobilized without material incentive, defensive necessity, or administrative enforcement. Within this framework, such sites represent early calibration zones, places where collective behavior could be shaped, synchronized, and observed before civilization hardened. The external agencies did not arrive and declare themselves. They approached the human species the way humans approach an uncontacted tribe. The first priority was not communication, uplift, or conquest. The first priority was risk control. The objective was to determine whether contact was safe, whether escalation would occur, whether the population could be shaped indirectly, and whether influence could be exerted without triggering uncontrollable detection or rapid diffusion. In that earliest period, the most plausible staging regions were not the early river valleys themselves, but zones that maximize concealment and minimize uncontrolled replication. Dense jungles, archipelagos, mountain corridors, and regions where access can be gated naturally. Southeast Asia and the broader China, Southeast Asia sphere function in this model as a base of operations environment. This is not mystical or symbolic, but logistical. These regions provide concealment, distributed geography, natural segmentation, and long-duration presence without easy detection. From such zones, interaction could be tested outward incrementally rather than explosively. The earliest interactions were not random sightings or isolated encounters. They were systematic behavioral interventions. Early on, the agencies appear to have recognized something humans still struggle to internalize. The most stable form of control is not force, occupation, or domination, but calibration. If constraints can be encoded into language, ritual, legitimacy, and cosmology, then populations will reproduce those constraints autonomously. Control becomes self-maintaining. This explains why early signal civilizations display precision and structured knowledge disproportionate to immediate survival needs. Advanced technology was not handed down wholesale. Instead, a governance-compatible operating layer was seeded. Procedures, interfaces, symbolic anchors, and rule-bound systems capable of persisting long after direct interaction declined. This logic explains the persistent emphasis on non-utilitarian precision. Monumental architecture locks populations into repetitive legitimacy cycles. Calendrical systems synchronize labor, ritual, and authority across time and space. Sacred geometry functions as a visual language of inevitability and constraint. Ritual procedures reward exact form rather than understanding. Precision is not for efficiency, it is for alignment. If the ritual must be exact, interpretation becomes power. If time itself is sacred, authority becomes temporal rather than personal. Before writing, this system operates through gesture. Hand signs, seals, postures, and symbolic actions form the earliest interface layer. Gesture precedes language because it is harder to corrupt, easier to standardize, and immediately observable. Sacred hand symbols persist across cultures not as superstition, but as fossilized interface commands. Speech follows, writing follows last. Writing does not initially function as communication between humans, it functions as logging. Early writing systems are administrative, legal, and ritual before they are narrative. Tablets record offerings, procedures, inventories, and judgments. They function as compliance records for authority that is not always physically present. Literacy is restricted because interpretation is power. The emergence of writing is consistently coupled with the emergence of authority itself rather than following it. In multiple high-signal civilizations, authority does not merely use writing, it is constituted by it. Legitimacy, command, ownership, law, and inheritance become real only when inscribed. This tight coupling indicates that writing functions as an access-controlled interface to power rather than a neutral communication technology. Its sudden appearance in fully operational form, without extensive precursors, mirrors other seeded systems. Immediate utility without visible developmental scaffolding. From this emerges tiered language. Public language and inner language share words but not meaning. Anyone may chant or recite, only the initiated may parse. Grammar is gated, context is gated. Authority resides not in speech but in validation of meaning. Heresy becomes misspeech rather than incorrect belief. Power persists because disagreement is linguistically illegitimate. Medicine and law emerge within this same structure. Early surgical laws, such as those governing eye surgery, imply measurable success rates. Punishment for failure only makes sense if failure is statistically rare. This indicates procedural competence without explanatory theory. Knowledge is operational, not conceptual. It is transferred as instruction, not understanding. This operational without theory pattern is visible not only in law and medicine, but across early technological spikes more broadly. Civilizations repeatedly demonstrate sudden, anomalous acquisition of advanced capabilities, surveying, astronomy, architecture, calendrics, followed not by continued exponential innovation, but by slow degradation and ritualized preservation. The pattern is not linear growth but spike, plateau, decay. Across known cases, the interval between peak calibration and clear procedural decay typically spans several centuries. High-bandwidth operational knowledge often degrades within a few generations once direct interaction ceases, while symbolic and institutional structures persist for centuries longer. At this stage, discrimination cannot rely on any single domain. No civilization qualifies as high signal based solely on architecture, myth, or symbolism. Classification requires overlap across multiple independent domains. At least 3 domains must exhibit non-utilitarian precision or procedural constraint, and at least one must encode authority or governance rather than expressive culture. Domain weighting is asymmetric. Law, calendrics. Institutional language, ritual grammar, and authority artifacts carry greater weight than mythic narrative or artistic form. Architectural precision alone is insufficient without temporal or legal reinforcement. Signal downgrade occurs when surviving elements persist only in expressive domains without procedural continuity, or when remaining signals can be plausibly generated by endogenous optimization alone. Below this density threshold, classification shifts toward partial signal or conventional development. Operational knowledge decays faster than symbolic structure. High-bandwidth systems, engineering tolerances, diagnostics, causal understanding require continuous feedback and therefore degrade rapidly once interaction ceases. Symbolic systems, ritual form, calendrical cycles, titles, taboos, cosmology, decay more slowly because they are socially reinforced and self-replicating. Decay is not smooth. It proceeds through punctuated phases driven by institutional collapse, political reconfiguration, loss of interpreter classes, or administrative rupture. Stabilization without recontact is possible when symbolic and institutional shells remain intact enough to dampen variance even as operational understanding disappears. A critical constraint governing all of this is error tolerance. The interaction model does not require perfect replication of seeded systems. It operates within bounded deviation envelopes rather than fixed targets. Early calibration establishes acceptable ranges of variation. Ritual precision, architectural ratios, calendrical accuracy, and procedural repetition function as error-damping mechanisms. When deviation remains within tolerance, the system self-corrects through social reinforcement, priestly arbitration, and institutional legitimacy. When deviation exceeds tolerance, correction ceases and interaction posture changes. This explains why some civilizations are allowed to drift far from original precision, while others are corrected, abandoned, or disengaged earlier. Cultures calibrated while socially plastic exhibit higher tolerance because constraints are internalized deeply and reproduced autonomously. Cultures calibrated later or more shallowly exceed tolerance faster because constraint encoding is thinner and more dependent on active reinforcement. Related to this is the formal constraint governing what knowledge is never ceded. Knowledge transfer is not optimized for productivity, growth, or material acceleration. It is optimized for governance compatibility and controllability. Systems that generate rapid, self-amplifying feedback, industrial recursion, high-density energy extraction, scalable metallurgy optimization, autonomous weaponization, are consistently withheld because they collapse calibration windows, amplify human agency faster than constraint reproduction, and raise detection and escalation risk. By contrast, symbolic systems, calendrics, ritual law architecture, and legitimacy structures scale slowly, reproduce culturally, and persist without requiring continuous intervention. This asymmetry reflects explicit constraint optimization rather than omission or benevolence. This stage, a second civilization class becomes visible, though not directly exposed. Many populations develop along conventional trajectories driven by environmental pressure, internal competition, and incremental innovation. They lack early precision spikes, deep ritual locks, or unusually persistent symbolic authority. Their existence is required. If all civilizations showed the same signal density, correlation would be meaningless. Non-exposed civilizations establish contrast. Exposure itself is not binary. Between high-signal civilizations and non-exposed groups lies a continuum of near-miss and partial signal cases. Some civilizations display early monumentality without sustained calendrical precision. Others develop advanced ritual systems without durable authority artifacts. Some show symbolic depth but lack institutional persistence. These gradients are expected outcomes of partial calibration, interrupted interaction, shallow constraint penetration, or higher observer cost thresholds. Crucially, high-signal civilizations also emerge independently across vast geographic and temporal separations. Mesoamerican and Andean civilizations exhibit early calendrical precision, monumental architecture, elite-gated ritual systems, and cosmological fixation without credible diffusion pathways from the Old World. Chronology, isolation, and absence of intermediate transmission chains eliminate contact-based explanations. Similar structures arising under independent conditions imply common constraints rather than shared origin. Then comes the procedural reset pattern. Adam and Eve class narratives encode bounded environments, explicit constraints, restricted knowledge access, violation events, and irreversible expulsion into a new operating regime. These narratives are not biological accounts but compressed records of controlled reinitialization logic. Their function is not to educate but to encode obedience as ontology. Forbidden knowledge is framed as existentially dangerous. Authority is framed as non-negotiable. Certain reset narratives preserve details that align more closely with procedural or mechanical processes than with mythic metaphor. Induced sleep, extraction of a rib, use of clay as a formative substrate, and construction of a human rather than natural birth parallel mechanical or medical sequences without implying conceptual understanding. These elements are consistent with procedural memory, preserved symbolically after loss of explanatory context. As interaction expands into later high-signal civilizations, the agencies behave not as tutors but as constrained operators. Knowledge transfer remains selective, procedural, and elite-gated. Explanations are limited. Contamination is narrow. Precision is deep but confined. Knowledge concentrates in priesthoods, elite lineages, and institutional layers capable of preserving constraint. The angelic layer forms as human observers translate unfamiliar systems into available vocabulary. Entities are attendants of objects. They descend rather than glide. They appear with shields, wheels, chariots, luminous platforms, and symmetric forms. They do not fly like animals. They travel like vehicles. Geometry dominates description because structure dominates perception. Authority is repeatedly associated with specific objects rather than with the human figure alone. Tablets, rods, crowns, thrones, weapons, seals, and measuring instruments function as portable loci of command. These objects encode legitimacy independently of their holder. Power resides in possession and correct use, not personal merit. Enoch-class material preserves operational logic rather than theology. Watchers descend. Instruction is restricted. Unauthorized transfer is punished. Enforcement targets protocol violation rather than moral failing. Entities appear differently in transit than during ground interaction, implying vehicles, staging zones, and logistical infrastructure. Multiple observer systems cannot be excluded a priori, but the model does not assume them. All observed behavior is attributable to a single regime, unless conflicting constraint signatures persist across domains. Distinguishing multiple systems requires durable divergence in calibration logic, incompatible authority structures, or interference patterns that exceed noise tolerance. Absent such evidence, multiplying agencies constitutes overfitting. As civilizations grow, detection risk increases. Writing spreads, records accumulate, observation capacity rises, interaction narrows, withdrawal occurs in distinct regimes, calibration complete transitions to observation-only mode, calibration failed transitions to disengagement, calibration suspended occurs under elevated detection pressure. When interaction ceases, knowledge degrades. High-bandwidth operational understanding decays first. Low-bandwidth symbolic structure persists. Ritual inflation follows. Cargo cult dynamics emerge. Correct form substitutes for function. Human agency remains active within constraint envelopes. Humans improvise, adapt, and repurpose seeded structures. Elites weaponize legitimacy. Engineers extract unintended utility. Innovation occurs but within inherited frames. Agency does not negate constraint, it operates inside it. Civilizations repeatedly encounter temporal ceilings. Around 1 to 1.5 millennia, complexity overwhelms coherence and systems reconfigure. This is not collapse but transformation. Bureaucracy, ritual legitimacy, language substrate, and measurement persist. High-precision operational knowledge does not. Early civilizations retain deeper shells that survive multiple reconfigurations. After withdrawal, observation continues. In the modern era, this appears as UAP behavior correlated with technological thresholds, especially nuclear capability. Nuclear detonations function as unforgeable escalation markers. Monitoring without open contact is consistent with long-term containment logic. Modern UAP behavior exhibits pattern continuity rather than randomness. Flight characteristics, interception avoidance, sensor denial, and escalation-linked appearance profiles mirror earlier interaction phases at a technological scale. Institutional responses, classification changes, reporting bottlenecks, engagement constraint are consistent with recognition of a persistent non-random phenomenon rather than isolated anomalies. Detection is not binary. Irreversible detection requires durable, independently replicable confirmation resistant to institutional suppression. Detection may be local without being terminal. Modern open science raises detection capacity by lowering replication cost, but also raises noise and false positive rates. The threshold remains gradient rather than absolute. Observer cost imposes trade-offs. Calibration depth correlates with investment. Early deep calibration represents high-cost engagement. Partial or delayed interactions reflect constrained capacity or higher opportunity cost. Monitoring many civilizations introduces prioritization pressure, explaining uneven exposure without invoking preference or intent. Termination remains bounded but unresolved. Permanent disengagement, indefinite dormancy, and conditional dormancy all remain possible. Persistent monitoring into the modern era suggests observation may be open-ended in some cases. Whether re-entry after full disengagement is possible remains unknown. The model specifies no success condition. Stabilization, non-destruction, parity, containment, or perpetual monitoring are all possible outcomes, but none are asserted. The system may lack a terminal goal altogether, operating under continuous risk management constraints. The framework constrains behavior, not purpose. The framework also includes explicit abstention rules. It refuses to infer motive, benevolence, hostility, morality, intention, or teleology. Structural inference is permitted only where constraint patterns repeat across independent domains and eras. Identity claims and moral narratives are excluded by design. The model generates forward-facing predictions. Future discoveries should continue to show abrupt early precision in governance-bearing domains without long developmental scaffolding. Newly discovered sites should preferentially display early monumentality, calendrical alignment, ritual standardization, or authority artifacts appearing earlier than expected relative to subsistence complexity. Negative predictions follow as well. Continuous cumulative technological scaffolding, uninterrupted causal manuals, or durable explanatory treatises preceding modern science should remain absent in high-signal civilizations. Discovery of such material would weaken or terminate the model. The model includes a failure mode taxonomy. Components may fail independently without total collapse. Archaeological misdating may weaken time-depth claims without invalidating governance calibration. Symbolic misinterpretation may reduce mythic alignment while leaving institutional patterns intact. Partial failure results in graceful downgrade to a comparative anomaly framework. Total collapse occurs only if alternative explanations account for equivalent multi-domain clustering with lower constraint cost. Finally, the model itself is bounded. It remains valid only while it explains cross-domain signal clustering, temporal persistence, and behavioral invariance with fewer assumptions than alternatives. Superior explanation supersedes it. Absence of evidence does not terminate it. This boundary is explicit. This is the puzzle. Not one artifact, not one text, not one event, but a web of correlated signals that, taken together, resembles a managed interaction pattern rather than random history.